You're listening to Scribble Talk Teaching, a podcast for bid and proposal professionals. My name is Bhaskar Sundaram, and I'll be sitting down with our industry leaders to dive deep into the topics that business-winning professionals like you can use to help grow your skills and your business. Today's guest is none other than the legendary Mike Markinson. And what do you think we are going to talk about? We are going to talk about at-a-glance proposal graphics. But before I get into the topic, few words about Mike, in case if you don't know Mike, then I'll be really upset. But Mike is an APMP Fellow. He's a total geek, as you all know. He's one of the 36 Microsoft PowerPoint most valuable persons in the world, a best-selling author and an industry thought leader. Mike runs billion-dollar graphics and has also published book on billion-dollar graphics and as a trainer's guide to PowerPoint, the best practice for master presenters. And he also owns buildagraphic.com, helping companies succeed while saving money and time. He's a partner at 24-Hour Company, a premium creative services firm, and owns billiondollargraphics.com. Again, Mike, welcome back to Scribble Talk, and let's talk all about at-a-glance proposal graphics.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me, Bhaskar. This is probably one of the most important things that I can think to share with people. And that is, and I suspect everyone understands, we are now living in an at-a-glance society. The days when people requested that our information be clear and succinct are gone. We now require it. So think about this. You and I, Bhaskar, and everyone listening, we are resource starved. We have to do a whole lot of work in a very little bit of time with limited resources. So what we have learned is to favor solutions that communicate very, very efficiently and effectively, or that I'm able to solve problems very efficiently and effectively. So everything in our brain is moving us more and more to a more efficient way of executing anything that we do, and that includes communication. So in the worlds of bids, proposals, tenders, when it comes to creating content, our evaluators, decision makers, reviewers are looking for the same thing. They're looking for, at a glance, what is your solution? And there are two critical criteria that every single evaluator, decision maker, and reviewer is looking for in your bid or proposal. And if we can achieve those two criteria, we will most likely win the bid. And those two criteria are, what is your solution and why should I pick you? Again, those two criteria are, what is your solution and why should I pick you? If you can figure out a way to communicate that at a glance, you are more likely to win versus your competitors.
Wow, what an introduction. And the 2 point that you mentioned is very common, very familiar, but most of the time we always not follow those things, Mike, as you know. But considering this is much more of a visual thing, Mike, let's talk a little bit more about that. I mean, like, how can we make an at-a-glance winning proposal?
Well, it's, I have a process that I use, and it's proven to be very effective. And I'm going to simplify it as much as humanly possible. And an acronym I like to use, and this is the first time I've ever said it out loud. This is something that I use in my back pocket, is GameCap. And the acronym breaks down to this. Number one is, the first thing I need to do when I create a proposal, a bid, is figure out what my goal is. Now, of course, you would say, well, my goal is to win the bid. Yes, but down further into the guts of the presentation, the goal may be different. Maybe it's to talk about your risk mitigation strategy, or maybe your goal is to talk about your deliverables or the schedule for your deliverables. So the goal changes. And when the goal changes, things have to shift. But assuming your goal is to win the bid, is to show people what our solution is. My goal is, what's my solution and why should we win? That's what I need to communicate. Well, then the next is the audience. Who's my audience? Now, there are 3 archetypes for reviewers, evaluators, and decision makers. And those 3 archetypes are as follows. Number 1, a strategic thinker. These are the bosses. These are the people running the departments. These are the people running the government agency or overseeing the work that's getting done. Then the next type of archetype for a reviewer, decision maker, or an evaluator is going to be the tactical person. The person who has to do the work. They're the technical geeks. They're the people who are stuck doing the work that you win, or at least working with you directly to execute the work that you win, or work with your product or solution. And then the third archetype is going to be the person who has no vested interest. And I just affectionately call them the evaluator. They're essentially, all they're doing is checking check boxes, giving a score, giving a grade. They are not impacted by whether you win or lose, or they were pulled in at the last second and they have no vested interest, understanding, proficiency in the topic. So those are the 3 archetypes that we might be selling to or creating our bids, proposals, or tenders for. Once I understand who's going to be on that source selection board, who's going to be reviewing my bid in the corporate structure, who's going to be evaluating it, who's going to be the decision maker, then I can move on to the next step, which is coming up with a message. So the first thing I need to know is, what's my goal? And then I need to know, well, who am I speaking to? Am I talking to tactical evaluators, strategic evaluators, just an evaluator who is not vested in any way, shape, or form? Now, a lot of times we're not going to know. I'd say more than 50% of the time we'll have a general idea, but we won't know for sure who is going to be reviewing our bid. So for that reason, when it comes to creating the message, I make sure that my messages appeal to all possible types of evaluators: the strategic thinker, the tactical thinker, and the just plain evaluator. Just vanilla. My job is to review this proposal, and that's it. How do we do that? Well, I break up my message into 2 parts, and I call it the M&M, the motivator and the means. So the motivator is what motivates people to care about our content. It basically provides context for our solution. So let's say we offer a solution that involves ITIL or agile performance, or maybe it uses the new XYZ AI engine. Well, what our structure for our message does, which should be 1 sentence with an M&M, it says, hey, by the way, that ITIL thing, it helps you by reducing risk or something like that. So I figure out what my top 1, 2, or 3 motivators are. No more than 3. Why? Because I have up to 3 archetypes for evaluators. So perhaps I would say save money. That would appeal to a strategic evaluator. And make your job easier. That would appeal to a tactical evaluator through our XYZ solution. And that would appeal to just a vanilla evaluator, because now I have clearly articulated what our solution is. And in the graphic, I'll show why we should win. So the regular plain vanilla isn't invested evaluator is just going to love when we clearly articulate our quote unquote value proposition. So I come up with my motivator and means. I would say, hey, save money, reduce cost with our new XYZ solution. Motivator, means. This is the 2 motivators you're going to get and the means by which you're going to get them. Because I've structured it this way, the regular evaluator is excited. Then the next thing that I do is I need to explain or prove that point. So I said, hey, you are going to reduce cost and save money and make your job easier using our XYZ solution. So I need to answer the organic questions that would come about if I were to say that to somebody. So if I said, hey, Beskar, we are going to save you money and make your job easier using our XYZ solution. Tell me if you agree with this. Wouldn't you want to know what our XYZ solution is? Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Mm.
So then the graphic needs to explain what the XYZ solution is
Totally.
and how it saves money and it makes your job easier. Once we do that, we've now explained what our solution is and how it delivers those benefits, those motivators. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to flag things that are unique to us. So I'm going to say in this architecture, in this graphic that I'm showing you, I am going to flag these 5 things that I don't think any other solution provider does. So now I have effectively communicated what our solution is and why we should win. So our solution is XYZ. Here it is. And if you follow this, you will save money and make your job easier because of this and this and that and that. And these are the 5 things within our solution that I don't think anybody else can bring to the table. And I'm going to draw those to your attention and call them my advantages. So I would just flag it with an icon or a symbol and say, every time you see this symbol, this is a solution provider advantage, whatever my company's name is. Then, of course, we would move on. Do you have any questions about what I just said? Was it too hard to understand? Did you follow it, Bhaskar?
I did. But as you rightly said, solutioning and bringing solution into a graphic is always the hardest part, Mike. I think going back into, yes, we understand the goal. I know you might not know who you are speaking to, but just in case, work on these archetypes of the thinker, the technical person, and the evaluator. But then comes the thing of, how am I going to visually present that these are my advantages, these are the things? Any kind of basic way of presenting it, Mike, and then maybe gradually improving? The best in class way of presenting your solution is, do it this way. And the kind of, at the very minimum basic way, do it this way, because you might have done thousands of graphics on solutions. At the very minimum, how can I take this and present it, Mike?
So great question. And so once I know my goal, I know my audience, or at least I have an idea that they're either going to be strategic, tactical evaluators, or just plain evaluators, or a combination of the 3, which I just don't know. Then I'm going to come up with my motivator and my means, which becomes, it's my message. It becomes my North Star. It becomes the adjudicator. So when I'm not sure what content should go in, I go back to my message. And if it doesn't fit under that message neatly, then I need to either change my message or I need to use it later in the bid or proposal. Then I explain it. I'd say, this is what our means is, and this is how you get those motivators with our means. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to chunk the information. So I'm going to start, quote unquote, bucketizing the information. So I'm going to say our XYZ solution is actually made up of three elements. It's made up of people, processes, and tools, or it's made up of innovations, it's made up of knowledge, and it's made up of perhaps it's technical and management, or whatever buckets we want to put our solution in. So it's up to us to simplify our content. It's up to us to organize our solution in a way that's digestible. So think of it like an outline. What we're doing is we're simply chunking the information, breaking it up into bite-sized digestible pieces, putting them into their respective buckets to align these solution assets. So in order for me to do anything, I need perhaps I need Scrum development, or I need ITIL, or I need people with these skills. Then I organize those people in their respective buckets and then illustrate how those buckets fit together. Well, if we're talking about management and technical, management will oversee technical. So now what I'm going to do, now that I have all my buckets, think of them as my actors. Now I'm going to arrange them on the stage, which is my page. So I'm going to say, all right, now I need to assemble these actors, these buckets of information, these chunks to tell a story. So again, hierarchically, management oversees the technical development. So there are lots of ways to illustrate overseas, meaning that oversight, you would show that maybe management surrounds or is the foundation from which we build. So use your, and when in doubt, just use Google or Bing to look up ideas, but use your common use your experience in the world of what you're doing to create the relative positions of these actors on your stage, if you will. As far as, and then there are only 4 ways to visualize something. Once you have this kind of architecture of your solution, there are only 4 ways to illustrate it. And I can go into those in a moment. But first, I want to talk about how we can flag our differentiators. What I use is an icon or a symbol. So perhaps you would use a star or a literal flag or a maybe your company's logo or a light bulb or something, and simply put a legend on your graphic that reads, this symbol equals your company's name advantage or strength or unique to our company or something like that. And then don't overuse it, because most of the time there's not many things that are completely unique, but flag the things in your graphic. Perhaps you're really good. You have a innovation lab or something like that. Flag that. No one else has your innovation lab. What else is an advantage or discriminator? Well, that's going to be someone on your team that the customer may know or like. And quick side note, Bhaskar, the difference, and I'm sure everyone knows this, just to reiterate, the difference between a differentiator and a discriminator is subtle. So a differentiator is something that you do that's different than your competitors. A discriminator is something that you do that's different than your competitors, but the company who's going to hire you cares about it, meaning that it has weight. It's contextualized to something that they want. So you can turn a differentiator into a discriminator. A perfect example of a differentiator would be Bhaskar. There's only one you in the world. There's no one else who has you. So if you're on my team and you're going to be working the job, that is a differentiator. Now, you would become a discriminator if the client already knew you and loved you, or enjoyed working with you, or I provided some credentialing or experience that specifically spoke to a problem that they were having. Then you would elevate from differentiator to discriminator. Again, am I making sense, Bhaskar? Is this easy enough to follow?
I think, when we talk a visual concept in an audio format, Mike, I think we rely on people's creativity. I think you kind of nicely laid a framework, and you also gave the framework with a kind of an example. I think that's brilliant, Mike. Let's just continue to talk about the other elements of the framework that you use, Mike.
Absolutely. So the last part is picturing it. It's I've got to come up with a visual. So now I've got this architecture. So think of them as could be squares on a PowerPoint slide, could be circles on a PowerPoint slide. Basically, all of my actors, all of my elements, all of my buckets, my chunks, whatever you want to call them, are now arranged to tell a story on my slide. So maybe I have people, process, tools in the center, and I have continual improvement around the outside, because we're always improving our people, process, tools. And then as a result of these people, process, tools with continual improvement, we will in fact lower cost and make your job easier. So that is the outcome. So there'd be a big fat arrow that would lead to these outcomes. Now I need to find out that there's another way to visualize it. And there's only 4 ways to visualize or picture something. Number 1 is the literal method. The literal method is used, think of it as the show me method. It's used when we're describing something. So if I said, hey, Bhaskar, can you pick up Danica at the airport? Danica's about this tall with this color hair. Forget it. Show me a picture. Show me a picture. So it's the show me method. So when we're describing something, let's say, hey, this is how you put the widget together, or this is how we execute this particular process. Actually, there's only 3 ways. There's only 3 ways to turn something into a visual. The 4th way we already covered under chunking and assembling. But the fact that if we're doing a process, we could show the process. So the next methodology, again, the first one is the literal method. It's the show me method. When you use it, when you're describing something. Number two is called the quantitative method. When do we use it? when we are talking about amount, value, or time, it could be notional. It could be notional. When we're talking about amount, value, and time, it's time to show a quantitative graphic. Think Excel, bar charts and pie charts and area charts, timelines, maps, Gantt charts. What is it? Dashboard graphics. These are all types of quantitative charts. So what we would do is if we're trying to show numbers, I'm going to use the quantitative chart that most resonates or reinforces how I want to quote unquote spin the information. I'm not talking about lying. What I'm saying is there are different ways to do analysis of data. Some charts work best depending upon how you want to evaluate the data. So it's really important not to just present data. It's to do the data analysis for the evaluator. Because if I just present the data, I am hoping that the evaluator, the reviewer, the decision maker has the room or the bandwidth or the time or the resources to review all the data and come to that conclusion. Instead, what I recommend is I review the data and figure out what my message is and then present that fact. I would follow the same process. What's my goal for this graphic? Who's my audience? What's my message? Explain it. And explain it would be quantitative information. And so, for example, if I'm showing a line chart, I would say with big bold letters, we have noticed a 28% decline in expenditures by using XYZ process. Make sure in the graphic itself, it reads what we want the conclusion to be, and then provide the evidence, which is the quantitative information.
Wow, that sounds very powerful, Mike. And you also kind of nailed down the charts that we can use, specific charts for specific purposes. If it's quantitative, use this type of charts and other elements as well. You also nicely touched about the need for action captions, which is like, don't just add it as figure 1.1 organization structure, right? Specific about why this organization structure is the right structure for your team. I mean, like that's a nice one. I think now let's is the framework still moves on from there, Mike?
Well, there's one last way to, I accidentally said there are 4 ways to turn something into a graphic. There's actually 3. So the first one is the literal method, the show me method. We use it when we are describing something. The second method is the quantitative method. It's amount, value, and time. We use quantitative charts to communicate it. And the last one is called the substitution method. The substitution method works like this. When I have information that's abstract or complex, I am going to use a visual metaphor, simile, or analogy. So, for example, I might talk about the heart regulating blood flow. Now, if my audience is a 6-year-old or 7-year-old, they might not have the proficiency in the topic to talk about or understand regulating blood flow. So I might say to a 7-year-old, it's kind of like a traffic light, that sometimes the light at an intersection lets some cars through while others stop, and vice versa. Your heart is constantly doing this at an accelerated pace. And that helps my audience understand what I'm trying to say. So when I have something that's abstract or completely innovative that my customers never heard of it, I'm going to use a metaphor, simile, or analogy to help them understand at a deeper level what I'm trying to communicate. Does that make sense, Bhaskar?
Totally makes sense, Mike. Yeah.
So that is at its core, that is the process. And by the way, your action caption should be your message.
Let's just do a quick summary of the process, Mike, so people can connect the dots, because you kind of nicely laid out the framework step by step. As a quick summary, at a glance graphics, Max, the 3-step process.
Yes. At a glance graphics, I use the acronym GAME-CAP, but it's figure out my goal, figure out who my audience is, my message, which should be broken up into a motivator and means, which will also be my action caption, explain or prove that message. So if I said, hey, you're going to make your job easier with our new Humpty Dumpty solution, I need to explain what our Humpty Dumpty solution is and how will it make your job easier. And then I would chunk that information, reassemble it to tell a story, and then picture it using the literal method, quantitative method, or substitution method.
Brilliant summary, Mike. Thank you so much, Mike. Obviously, it's a framework, and designers. If you have a designer in the team, then you can talk through the solution to a designer, and then work with the designer, and then come out with the answer. But not many people have designers in your team, and that's where the $1 billion graphics and at a glance graphic comes up with, because you have built up a lot of what we call off-the-shelf graphics. Mike, talk us through about that.
Yeah, sure. One of the challenges that I find is that conceptualization, which is kind of what we're doing, is a challenge. Following this framework, following this process, is going to get you to the point that you have something. The biggest challenge that I found people have after they do that, and by the way, conceptualization is far more valuable than rendering the graphic. However, it would be so horrible to spend all that time and effort conceptualizing this amazing graphic or set of graphics and then have it fall short because they look unprofessional. We don't want to do that. So not everyone can have access to a graphic designer. My number one thing is always hire someone who can do it better, faster, cheaper than you. I would never, ever, ever, ever try to do what you do, Bhaskar. I would just hire you to do it. And no one, if you're not a graphic designer who's had proposal experience, that's critical. Then if you're not that, I would hire that person with that skill set. However, not everybody can. A lot of times we have to make do with our own knowledge, the own resources that we have. So what I did was I created this tool called Build a Graphic. I worked with my fellow Microsoft MVPs. And if you go to buildagraphic.com, you can see a video of it to see if it's right for you. But essentially, it is a PowerPoint add-in that helps you turn your words into professional graphics. So what it does is it analyzes the keywords and phrases on your slide or your page. And then what it does is it helps you convert those or find a visual that then you can edit, modify, make your own brand standard. It's made up of what's called vector graphics, but you can then use that to augment or switch out your content for a visual so that you can render it yourself professionally. And there's thousands and thousands of graphics in there. The library is constantly growing. So that is a great resource that I put out there approximately 2 years ago. And I have heard nothing but positive things from everyone. This has been a game changer for those that struggled with rendering these graphics once they came up with the ideas.
That's nice, Mike. I think, if you could be you could have a designer in the team, or you might not have designer in the team, but it's worth exploring because it's not just, all the graphics that you have created comes from your experience of working with a lot of customers over the years, Mike. Mike, from your experience, the pros and cons of design. Sometimes, design, most of the time we expect visual graphics helps people to understand the solution better, but doing it wrongly, it just can go the other side as well. What's your advice on that, Mike?
Again, wonderful questions. I'm going to unpack it just a little bit. So the first thing is, if you do not have, if I am someone who's not a graphic designer and I don't have access to a tool like Build a Graphic, my recommendation is decide whether you even need a graphic. And there's only 3 reasons to have a graphic in a bid, proposal, or tender. And that is, number 1, it's a critical success factor, meaning that if the decision maker, evaluator, reviewer misses or misunderstands this bit of information, we will lose. Number 2 is that it's too complex to understand textually. Think about your organization's structure. Imagine trying to explain that textually when you could easily at a glance communicate it via an org chart. And the third reason would be that you want to elicit very quickly a specific emotional response. Think bid covers. Think about the cover. The cover is trying to elicit a very specific emotional response in the reviewer, decision maker, or evaluator. So once I decide as a non-designer, oh, I absolutely need a graphic, but I have no skills and I have no access to build a graphic. I have no access to a designer. What do? Well, the simple answer is to create something that is as simple as possible, meaning do not try to embellish the graphic as a non-designer, because a non-designer will go off of their own personal biases as to what they think looks good. However, most of the time I found that when they try to use the built-in functionality within a tool like PowerPoint to create their graphics, and they try to add drop shadows and gradients and special 3D effects, all they do is make the graphic look more and more unprofessional, because a professional designer doesn't need to hide behind aesthetic embellishment. They make sure that as long as you followed my process, you are going to have a very compelling message for your graphic. You don't need it to be super fancy to execute this. Just keep it simple. Now, don't get me wrong. If you have a competitor who uses a graphic designer and or a tool like Build a Graphic, they are going to win because their stuff looks even more professional, but it's not because of aesthetic embellishment. It is because they are building things or making things that you can't make. And one of the things I like to remember in the world of bids and proposals, it's not content that is king. Content is table stakes. Content is expected. Good quality content is expected. It's contrast. Did you stand out? Did I clearly understand why you are better? Looking at your proposal, does it look like you're better than your competitors? Did you spend more time on your proposal? Does it look better architected, laid out? Is it clearer, easier to follow, more professional looking graphics? These are things these are shortcuts that evaluators, decision makers, and reviewers take to help them choose you as the best solution provider. So that is a very long way to answer your very brief question. Sorry, Viskar.
No, Mike, I think I think you nailed it, because sometimes what happens is, oh my God, I have a content which is full of text now. Let me squeeze in a couple of graphics. There is no need for the graphics, but you just squeeze some graphics just to kind of for the sake of it, and it kind of skews the whole message. You just nailed it. Think it through, do what it takes. But Mike, when you look at the graphics, Mike, I know we're talking about proposals in general, but sometimes the graphics are also heavily used as, in the marketing and the other things. What is your experience, Mike, of using, explaining the same thing to people in a website or on a social media post, and then using similar graphic in proposals? Is marketing graphics and the graphics that we use there, can they be repurposed and used in the proposals, or vice versa? The proposal graphics can be, repurposed and used there. What's your experience from that, Mike?
As long as the goal in the audience hasn't changed, then your graphic can absolutely be reused. If you go back to that kind of game cap archetype, if your goal changes or your audience changes, then you want to change the graphic. Now, that doesn't include having to modify things for the medium. So for the medium, let's say if I go from a written document to an oral bid, or I go from a website to a handout, I'm of course going to have to modify the font sizes or maybe the dimensions of my graphic, but that's independent of the other stuff. That's on the rendering side. So as long as my goal and my audience changes, we can absolutely reuse the heck out of that graphic, because I'm still trying to achieve the same thing for the same people. But of course, if the goal and or audience changes, that message has to be modified. And once I modify that message, the graphic will obviously change, and I need to change things accordingly in my concept and then re-render the graphic as needed.
That's a brilliant one, Mike. Mike, I think now is the time to, kind of soften up a bit and say, Mike, you know what, when you began designing at the early years of designing, Mike, talk us through any interesting stories of, people explaining it to you and then how easy was it to perceive that information and come out with a graphic, Mike? What would be the best way of asking people, hey, you know what? Tell me this. Sometimes people write in a piece of paper, draw that in a piece of paper, take a picture and say, this is what I want. Or look at the whiteboard. I've done some mapping, convert that into a graphic. From your experience, how do you think we should capture an information? And to just share some funny stories around that, Mike.
Oh, sure. Number one is that it has become my job to take those back of the napkins, scribbles, and whiteboards and figure out what the person's trying to say. So my job has now become someone who creates that message. So I look at these scribbles that they have and I say, all right, can I figure out what their message is, what their motivator and means is? If I can't, then I reach out to them and I ask them. But it used to be the case that I would sit in the room and really smart people, subject matter experts, engineers, architects, solution architects would get into a room and they would just say things at each other. They would say, oh my goodness, we are going to be partners with the customer and we're going to use the best of breed and we're going to have a communication plan and we're going to, okay, all right, Mike, we just talked about our solution for the last hour and a half. Now go make the winning graphic. And I remember thinking, I didn't hear a solution. I heard you shouting out buzzwords, and randomly, if I was lucky, I'd pick something like a communication plan and say, part of your solution involves a communication plan. There was no structure for how one develops a solution. And so what I did was I've learned through through doing it the wrong way is that I need to follow a process. So now when I meet with my customers, what I do is I say, all right, walk me through this. Who's my target audience? Are they going to be strategic thinkers? Are they going to be tactical thinkers? Are they going to be just evaluators? And oftentimes they say, well, we're not sure yet. And I said, well, let's assume they're all three. All right, so let's come up with our message. Let's summarize our graphic before we create it. Because if we think about the correlation in the real world, can you imagine ever starting to say something in a formal environment when you don't know what you're trying to say? So imagine I threw you up on the stage at this giant conference and I didn't give you any information at all. And I just said, all right, go ahead and talk to us and engage us, entertain us, educate us. And you're like, who's my audience? I'm not telling you. Okay. What's their goal? What are they trying to get out of this? I'm not going to tell you. Well, I can't come up with a message. I can't come up with anything if I don't know that information. And that's typically what happens in a bid or proposal. We need to figure out what our goal is, who our audience is, and what we're trying to say before we say it. It's like, so another funny story is most of my life as a graphic designer, I would create these graphics and they would submit them for color team reviews or reviews in any process that their organization has. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, the action caption was at best written after the review or just before the review, but certainly after the graphic. So what happened is we wound up revising the graphics a lot of times, like 28, 30, 40, 50 times, because what we were doing is we were in an I'll know it when I see it situation. We didn't know what our message was. We didn't know what our North Star was. We didn't know what we were trying to make. We just had some generalities about the actors or the buckets or the pieces, but we had no idea what our overall story was. So I would create a graphic. The engineer would say, nope, that's not good. And then I would create another one and they would say, nope, that's not good. When really what we should have done is created that action caption first.
Oh, brilliant, Mike. I think, this kinds of nails the points really. So it's always good to have a framework in mind. If you don't have a framework, at least have some sample of what could be the way of representing it. And that's where $1 Billion Graphics comes in. Use it as a framework or use it at least as a starting point to enable conversations within your team. Mike, any final pointers of do's and don'ts of graphics before we close the episode, Mike?
Nothing that I haven't already said. Essentially, just know that if you're going to do graphics and you need to win a bid, hire someone. They're going to do it better, faster, cheaper than you will. But if you can't, find a resource. By far, the most important thing is conceptualizing it first, using whatever structure you like. I gave you mine. That is the most important thing, because I can hire someone to make my graphics pretty and compliant, but I really can't hire someone to come up with that winning story. So that conceptualization piece, in my opinion, is far more valuable and important than rendering the graphic. Just don't skip out on the final rendering of the graphic to make sure that you come across as professional.
Brilliant, Mike. And the resources that you suggest, Mike, we will add it part of the podcast episode. We'll include the Build the Graphic. We'll also include $1 Million Graphics. Any other resources that you recommend, Mike?
There's some other free resources out there for photographs, pexels.com and pixabay.com. They're spectacular. Unsplash.com. They're great for finding photographs and things like that, and videos too, if you're doing orals, but there are tons out there.
Thank you, Mike. Brilliant. Mike, it's always a pleasure. You know, the more and more we talk about this, the more and more there's always something that we could pick from here that we could learn, or we just totally revisit the way you approach conceptualizing graphics and using it in proposals. Mike, as always, it's a brilliant episode. Thank you so much for your time today. It's an honor and privilege to bring you back. Wish you all the good health, Mike. I hope to see you, and so looking forward to see you at the TELUS conference. But thank you, Mike. We'll share the links. Continue to inspire us. Stay healthy, Mike. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bhaskar. Enjoy.
Thank you.
To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Please visit batchyscribble.com/podcast to listen to this episode and check out any of our other previously recorded episodes. If you've enjoyed today's interview, don't forget to subscribe, review, and share the Scribble Talk podcast. We hope you'll check out our next episode where we interview another industry expert and special guest. Until then, it's Ashley Kays,
Bhaskar Sundaram,
signing off.